friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. Today we have recently pulled our sweet potatoes and it's time to cure them. So I want to talk to you about how to cure sweet potatoes. So the first thing I want to address is why cure sweet potatoes, and that's because when a sweet potato first comes out of the ground, it's actually not very sweet. It's actually kind of a woody type flavor, and the curing process is what gives us that classic sweet potato flavor. So that's the whole reason why we're about to do what we're about to do. Another thing that curing sweet potatoes does is, as you are harvesting sweet potatoes, it is just inevitable that you're going to either nick some sweet potatoes, you're going to pull off some sweet potatoes, and it's going to leave an opening to the flesh on the inside. You might accidentally dig in there and stab it with a shovel. I mean, it's just inevitable to have little nicks and cuts on your sweet potatoes. And sweet potatoes can store for a really long time if you cure them properly. But if that fresh flesh of the sweet potato is exposed to the air, it can cause it to, or moisture, it can cause it to rot. So curing helps all of those nicks and cuts and everything to scab over so that the sweet potato can still be stored long term. So that's why we primarily cure sweet potatoes. So sweet potatoes need to cure. There needs to be about three things. There needs to be high humidity, between 80 and 85 degree temperature, and time, which is about 2 weeks. You have those three things and you will have good sweet potatoes on your hands. So there are multiple ways that we can go about curing sweet potatoes. The first method is a method that I'm going to be using this year because my environmental conditions are right. So temperature wise, we are looking between 80 and 85 degrees temperature. Humidity wise, we want it above 50% humidity, and then time. So in my area, I'm in the south, and our temperatures this week and next week are going to be between 80 and 90 degrees. When it comes to curing sweet potatoes, you can go a little bit above and you can go a little bit below that 80 to 85 degree temperature, and it'll be just fine. I've heard many people say, or not many, but some people say that they don't grow sweet potatoes because they don't have anywhere to cure them properly. And don't let that stop you from growing sweet potatoes. You can cure them in a closet. We will talk about that. But in my particular circumstance this year is my weather is just being very favorable for curing sweet potatoes. So I'm going to do it straight outside just like this. And what I'm doing is I'm going to lay them out flat to where they're not really touching, or they're not laying on top of each other. It's okay for them to be touching each other. But I don't want them layered on top of each other. I want a nice, even, flat layer. And what I'm going to do we got the temperature taken care of, just the ambient outside temperature for the next 2 weeks. So the next thing we need to do is humidity. I live in the south and our humidity levels are pretty much always higher than 30%. I mean, it is chronic humidity here. So I don't have too much to worry about, but just to make sure I'm getting an ideal humidity rate, I'm just going to pull this tarp over. I've got a brick over here. I'm just going to cover my sweet potatoes with this tarp, and that's just going to help trap in some heat and trap in some of that moisture that's naturally in the sweet potatoes that might be trying to evaporate off, and it's just going to help me get a more humid type environment. And I'm just going to put bricks down on the sides to keep the wind from blowing it up. And this is where it's going to sit for about 2 weeks. I'm going to keep an eye on our weather and make sure that it's not going to be raining. If it is going to be raining, this is another reason why I'm putting it on a tarp instead of just laying it flat on this table, is because if it rains, I need to get these sweet potatoes out of the rain. I don't want them getting wet. So I'm going to be watching my weather like a hawk, and if rain is in the forecast, I'm going to just be able to grab this tarp of sweet potatoes and pull them into my garage. And when the rain passes, I can bring them back out into the sun area again. So that's how I'm going to be doing it this year. One more note before I move on to the other methods that you can cure sweet potatoes is I saw a rotten sweet potato. I want to address that real quick. If you have any rotten, I have one rotten sweet potato here, and this came out of the ground rotten. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to toss it over here. We have free range chickens. They will find this sweet potato and absolutely love it and thank me for it. But if you have any rotten sweet potatoes, go ahead and pull those out and get them away. But if you have broken, nicked, poked holes type sweet potatoes, it's totally fine for them to stay. Like I said, they'll scab over just fine. Okay, so method 2, what if your conditions outside are not favorable for curing? So this happened to me last year. My outside conditions were not favorable. We had a very rainy season right around the time of sweet potato harvest. So what I did is I put them in my garage on a table, once again, laid out to where they weren't piled on top of each other, and I actually got a wool blanket and put that wool blanket on top of the sweet potatoes. And that worked for me because my outdoor temperature was in the 70s. So my garage is going to be higher than that. I didn't have a thermometer in there, so I don't even know exactly the temperature. And that's another point about my point earlier. Don't worry about it. If you can't get perfect conditions, don't let that stop you from growing sweet potatoes. They will cure just fine as long as you do some basic principles. So in my garage, I'm guessing it was probably in the high 70s. So we didn't hit that 85-degree ideal temperature, but it was fine. They cured just fine. And that blanket just helps hold in the humidity. What if you live in an area that is cold around the time of your sweet potatoes harvest? What if the temperature drops into the 50s, all of a sudden, and so you can't cure them outside and you can't cure them in a garage? And what happens if you don't have a garage? So that's what this third method, you can try this third method. I think the wind blew away my bag. Oh, here it is. And that's just with a trash bag. And I like using a white trash bag because we're going to set it in a sunny windowsill, and I guess I just feel like it's easier to kind of peek through and make sure there's not any mold or anything going on in a white trash bag, but it probably doesn't really matter. You can use a black one too. And so we're going to do the same principle, which is laying them in our bag in a single layer, not on top of each other. It's okay if they're touching, but we don't want them laying on top of each other. And once we get the bag full, then we're going to go through and poke some holes. I just got a pair of scissors here, and I'm just going to go through and snip just a few holes throughout the bag, because while we need it to be humid and moist, we don't want the sweet potatoes to accidentally cook, and we don't want the sweet potatoes to be so humid that they're sweating and introducing mold type environment. So having these little air holes will help us prevent that. So I'm just putting little air holes around, and then what we can do is we can either put this in a room that is warm, the warmest room in your house, or a sunny windowsill. And you can just you don't need to close up the bag. Just, lay it on a table in a sunny room, or lay it in your windowsill, or set a table near a sunny windowsill or something like that, and keep that there for about 2 weeks. During the process of those 2 weeks, you do want to peek through, no matter which method you use. You want to peek in and make sure your sweet potatoes aren't developing excess moisture. You don't want to see condensation building up on this bag or this tarp, and you don't want to see any moisture or mold type, rotten type stuff happening on your sweet potatoes. So as far as that 2-week time frame, what do you do during that time? It's just monitoring, making sure that it's not getting excessively moist. One quick thing I forgot to mention is that when you harvest your sweet potatoes, don't wash them off. Keep that dirt on there. That dirt is going to help them cure. It's going to help them scab up, and if you were to wash your sweet potatoes, you would be introducing too much humidity that could then lead to rotten potatoes during the curing process, which we don't want. So just pull them straight out of the ground and go straight into this curing stage. After that 2-week window of time, if you really want really nice and sweet potatoes, then what you can do is wrap each individual sweet potato in newspaper and put them in some kind of box and keep them in your house. And that's actually how I store my sweet potatoes. After this curing phase, I then wrap them individually in newspaper and put them in a big cardboard box, which I store in my closet. And then I wait 6 weeks before we start working through these sweet potatoes. And that 6 weeks of extra curing time in those newspaper little sacks, so to speak, is going to really get them nice and sweet. And not only that, that is a way to store them long term, because they're not touching each other. Being stored up in that newspaper lets them last a long time. I harvest sweet potatoes every year pretty much in September. It is September 19th, I believe, and I have we just ate sweet potatoes last night from our previous year's harvest, and I think we have about 6 or 7 sweet potatoes left. So 6 to 7 sweet potatoes left from last year's harvest that I harvested in September of 2022. So they have lasted in that area in my closet wrapped in newspaper for a year. So that is a fantastic way to preserve food without having to can or dehydrate or freeze or anything like that. So I hope that was helpful to y'all. Remember, don't let lack of perfect conditions stop you from growing sweet potatoes. They'll cure as long as you just do follow those tips that we just discussed, and it's worth it. A sweet potato is a fantastic crop. It's low maintenance. I didn't weed, I didn't fertilize. In fact, sweet potatoes don't even like to be fertilized, and they just grow. They grow, and they're a high calorie food. They're delicious. You can prepare them all different ways. So if you are brand new to gardening, I do highly recommend one of the crops that you might want to consider starting with is sweet potatoes. Okay, y'all, we'll see y'all next time. Bye.